All right, so we've talked about theories of emotion. Now we're going to move into discussions of expressing it and experiencing it. And those are two fairly different connotations when it comes to emotion. This video on emotional expression is going to be really, really, really short, very tiny, and it probably could be combined with your experiencing emotion notes, but it's best to just kind of keep them differentiated and separated out as two videos just so that way there's not a whole lot of confusion. So culture very, very much plays a role in many of the emotions that we are capable of discerning. However, there has been some research out there to show that no matter what language people speak or what cultural background they come from, we do fairly commonly speak the same kind of facial language around the world. There are, for the most part, 7 emotional, universal facial expressions of emotion that we are all able to kind of pick up on and discern. So, when culturally diverse people are shown basic facial expressions of emotions that are typically fairly universal, they are able to understand what those happen to be, even if they're not from the same culture. So, first is happiness, then surprise and fear, sadness, anger, and then disgust. The 7th is contempt. That isn't included on this little breakdown of facial expressions, but nevertheless, more than likely you were able to pick up on the facial expressions that were provided before I even started listing off what they happen to be described as. We're usually very good at being able to pick up on body language. That is something that very much plays a key role in emotions, and so that's important to note. So, some more levels of, kind of taking this and elaborating on it further. It's pretty clear these two look fairly happy. So no matter where we were coming from, if we were dealing with somebody from sub-Saharan Africa or from Iceland or someone from Singapore or Guatemala, no matter what any of those cultures have in terms of differentiations, they would all be able to understand that this would be, for the most part, happiness. Just like it'd be fairly easy to see that this little boy is pretty upset and fairly sad. So emotion does have a level of facial universality to it. But it is important to recognize that gender does play a role in, to some extent, understanding emotion and expressing it and experiencing it. Women are much better at picking up on nonverbal emotion than men are. So when shown certain aspects of body language, women were much more able to pick up on that. And it's also kind of an easier way to see based off of this and women's abilities to perceive and detect those things, that oftentimes women are a little bit more able to pick up on certain cues that men are not. Women often have a tendency to try to give kind of subtle hints to men, but oftentimes men have a tendency to have difficulty picking those up, and much of that may be because of the fact that women are better at just picking up on nonverbal cues to begin with. When shown certain kinds of emotionally evocative things, women have a tendency to express their emotions much more than men do. This isn't something that's terribly out of the ordinary based off of many of your personal everyday experiences, whether you be male or female. So it's important to recognize some of this is biologically based, but it does tend to depend on the culture, because different cultures teach men and women different things. Women, for example, in Western culture are somewhat encouraged to display and express their emotions, while men, on the other hand, are taught that that's not what they're supposed to do. Men are supposed to be strong, and they're not supposed to demonstrate any level of emotion. Most research has not shown one sex to be more emotionally expressive than the other, and that's very important to recognize when we're looking at the cultural implications of expressing and experiencing emotion later on. So I would certainly star this for yourself, because this is one of our objectives on the review guide where we look at the cultural implications of emotion. So this is particularly important. Most people find it kind of difficult to detect deceptive emotion, someone who's trying to kind of pull the wool over your eyes, so to speak. even trained professionals like police officers or psychiatrists, judges, polygraphists, we're going to talk about polygraphs in a second, they're only able to detect deceptive emotion 54% of the time. That's not very good. So, I mean, it's very difficult then for us to be able to kind of see and discern when someone is kind of, trying to throw us off or trying to deceive us in some manner. So Paul Ekman, his research was the one that created that seven facial universalities piece that we just looked at. So here he is again. The question that we have to look at is which of his smiles is genuine? Both are smiles and both seem relatively genuine. But the thing is, we don't really know which one is which. One could be more deceptive than another, and for some of us, one way might perceive to be more deceptive really, in fact, is not. So it's very difficult for people to be able to pick up on that. The question then becomes then, how do you pick up on those deceptive pieces? First and foremost, the cognitive effort. Heightened attention can be used to try to pick up on whether a person is deceiving you. There are longer pauses in their speech. They can have much more concentrated and constrained kind of movement. So they're being very forced and thoughtful in their movement, and that can come off as kind of not genuine. Heightened attention has a tendency to cause dilated pupils as a result. So if you're kind of wondering if somebody is throwing you off and trying to pull the wool over your eyes, you can take a look at their pupils. Physical and behavioral arousal matters too. There's shifts in their posture or their speech. If they have any kind of nervous tic or gestures, their body movement in general, they try to focus on that poker face, just keeping something very straight, no emotion whatsoever. So you want to pay attention to their body movements, the kind of smiles that they give, or hand gestures. If they won't make eye contact with you, that's another kind of indication that more than likely they might be lying to you. Eye contact, as I said, it is very, very, very important, not only because of the aspects of the dilated pupils and just the body movement piece, but if a person is lying to you, they're not necessarily going to practice strong eye contact. If a person tells the truth, they're probably going to be unable to look you straight in the eye just because they're going to feel uncomfortable doing so and acknowledging, something that they didn't necessarily want to tell you. And sometimes that has a tendency to kind of go against what we think. A lot of times people will say, well, if you're telling the truth, look me straight in the eye and tell me. Sometimes that's not always going to be an accurate indication, so that's an important piece to recognize to this. So, polygraphs, typically perceived to be means of alerting somebody within the legal system to whether an individual may be lying, whether that be a criminal or a family member of a victim or something along those lines. So what a polygraph does is it measures your level of arousal while you are asked fairly critical questions and then some questions that are kind of irrelevant. And then you've got control answers. And this is all done very, very, very specifically in great detail. The critical questions are meant to ask what they want the answers to. The irrelevant questions are meant to determine truthful responses, to elicit those from you, so that way they can kind of gauge whether some of your other responses are not accurate. And then control questions that are meant to get emotionally aroused responses, and they're all mixed up during that interrogation. Now, the way that a polygraph operates is to look at how your body reacts while under that particular scenario of them asking these questions to you. So they're looking at heightened body reactions to the questions that are being addressed, and that's the way that they attempt to determine whether you're lying or not. The accuracy level is that there's no guarantee to the evaluations. Most people don't believe that it's possible for you to have true levels of polygraph tests that are 100% accurate. And in some scenarios, you can have some people who are so good at being deceptive that they can train their body to not have certain heightened levels of response or arousal to a polygraph test. So that's something to keep in mind. Half of all of the states in the U.S. don't allow polygraphs to be used as evidence in court purely just because of their fallibility. We just do not consider them to be truly valid or reliable means of obtaining evidence for a person's state of mind at a particular point. So that is the end of this video. Like I said, very, very, very brief, very short. So the next one you're going to want to move into is our final extension of emotion.